Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us at this installment of News Digest. I'm joined here by a new friend, actually, the former Chief Operating Officer at Grocery Outlet, Tim Scott. Tim, congratulations on your retirement and moving on to the next chapter and advising and kind of staying involved in the business, but moving into sort of other facets, board work and advisory stuff. How's the last year or so been going?
It's been engaging, very enlightening, touching many parts of the industry and the innovations in the industry, John. So it's been interesting. A lot of great conversations and a lot of great learning.
Terrific. You know, you have spent a huge part of your career in the grocery retail supply chain in North America with sites with postings in Canada as well as in the United States. And, I did too. I think about the complexity of that supply chain. I think it's underappreciated because people look and they're like, it's food and it comes. And the reality is, we've been talking about pulling the waste out of this supply chain since the, CPFR days of 1990s, where, we acknowledged you had a supply chain as a retailer. I had a supply chain as a provider, formerly at General Mills, and our suppliers all had supply chains, and everyone was trying to optimize their own, which never optimized the value chain. So there had to be ways we could do this differently. That was back when all the cups runneth over, when, we could handle inflation, we could navigate, consumers were in a decent space in North America, people weren't spending tremendous amounts of their income on food. The world has kind of changed. Everything's tightened down, way more disruptions. People in our jobs were dealing with cybersecurity and food security and inflation challenges and longer supply chains, tons of disruptions we never saw. Do you think that this drives us to be better collaborators and we're going to get forced to sort of play differently together? Or is it your experience that when times get tough, everybody kind of goes into their shell and kind of runs their own playbook? What are you seeing in this? Because I think it's an interesting time. I always thought collaboration is the magic unlock. And yet there's always a good reason not to do it.
Yeah, again, great question. I think about it often, right? I think it's as putting my retailer hat on from a conventional perspective. I think that everyone's instincts in times like these is to retreat into the shell and protect the farm.
Yep.
So I think that's what folks are experiencing. I think these last 6-8 months where there's been significant change and lack of consistency or continuity. I think those times, I think it's just human nature to kind of retreat within and to protect the farm, as I said. I think as we start to poke our heads out to understand, okay, what is the new normal? This is the new normal.
Yep.
There's been some reasonable consistency over the last little while. Yeah, I think the environment is right for collaboration. I think there'll be some new and refreshing engagements to, data is flowing freely. You've got AI influencing some of those interactions, or many of those interactions, or soon to be influencing those interactions. And provided there's mutual trust, provided there is just clarity as to accountability of decision making and ultimate end goal. Again,
Right.
most of these are for-profit businesses, so those decisions that cascade down and through the supply chain from the field, through the manufacturing into retail and then to the home and the consumer and the fork. I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities to redefine collaboration.
So when you I agree with you, and I think that as opposed to drama and disruption being a catalyst for change, oftentimes it's a reason to stick to your knitting and closer to your own stuff. But that likely is not we're such a connected supply chain and such an ecosystem with lots of complexity. That probably is not the right answer. And so I heard you say, if you had trust, if you had, in your experience, are there are there vendors or are there, and I don't need names, but what were the characteristics of people that you wanted to work with, that you felt like, okay, I understand what they're bringing to the party? And then I think we'll get into, so does AI make that better? Does it make it unnecessary? But for that, just the foundational stuff that I think sometimes people overlook. Who do you want to do business with? Who are the people that you're like, okay, I get it. That's probably worth our time. We should engage with them.
Yeah, and I think it's tough as a retailer with conventional infrastructure. I keep talking about conventional because my experience at Grocery Outlet was a little different, right? They were
Yep,
far from a conventional retailer
for sure.
and very opportunistic in nature. But I think I'll answer your question through my conventional lens. Retail, grocery retail anywhere is tough. And I think it is where the manufacturer understands that retail is tough. It is single digit margins net, um, and a very complex trading environment with listings and complexity of multiple vendors and multiple categories having to be stitched together and orchestrated in a way to deliver, right, what is a solid quarter at 5% margins.
Right.
Um, it's a different environment in CPG, right? You guys operate in double-digit environments, and you've got equally tough pressures for those listed publicly, for sure. And why I reference trust is that from time to time, I think I'm just trying to choose my words here. It's the packaged goods groups win, and retail barely makes it over the finish line, right, with scars and scratches, as it's ultra competitive in most markets. So I think that's, as I reflect on your question with trust, it is the partners that sit across the table that understand that life in retail is rough,
Yep.
and that
Okay.
competition is significant, right? And with full awareness that you may be, in fact, trading with our competition, and there needs to be a win. There needs to
Right.
be a win, however we mutually define that, and it's tough in retail to do that. Acknowledging the competition, acknowledging you're speaking to our competition, and acknowledging that somehow in the end our plans need to work and
Yep.
it needs to deliver the promise. And
Yeah,
so
I think that's
that's
a
those are
that's a really
tough.
good that's a really good point. And because by definition, and I think it works both ways, right? So I show up as
Hmm.
a supplier to you. You're talking to all my competition too, and
Yeah.
and and so making sure that we can define what's good for us, and
Hmm.
that we can come to a place where, while our business profile and maybe our business our particulars are different, at the end of the day, I can't win without you winning. I can't get to people who actually pay us the money at the end of the day, right? The consumers, without having you be successful. It can't be
Yeah.
at your expense. It's the same thing I think we found when we looked at the value chain around sustainability and those things. You want to have a tough life, go to be a farmer. And the answer is, but none of us survive without the farmers, right? We need them to win. They need to
Yeah.
participate. They need to participate along the way. So if we can find this place where we can look at each other and believe that we have a win-win, a place where we can grow and maybe expand together. Does does this advent of technology, where it used to be we just trusted one another, and then we had to figure out, okay, are you on EDI, or how are we gonna exchange data, and can we get our two smartest men and women in the room and have them talk to each other? Now there's technology to do all that crap. So do you think it's an opportunity, or where do you? I heard it described in a roundtable we did just the other day. We're in the first inning of AI. We're talking a lot about it, but I don't know that anybody's figured out how really to have it drive that partnership. What are your thoughts on how that's going to change our world?
I'm very optimistic when it comes to assessing the application of AI in the supply chain, especially the food supply chain. I think the constraints of the past, um, technology is going to provide us much more firepower. I call it firepower, analytics and insights, and allows us to solve bigger decisions faster, or just things faster. And that's what makes me excited. In the past, it was it was your smartest person and my smartest person, right, getting together. And in the past, there were constraints because everybody wanted those smartest people, and you had to prioritize those engagements and limit your wins or limit your potential, through that. But now with some of the technology that is getting itself around the data that facilitated those great decision making, or empowered those smartest people on either side of the fence, retail and manufacturing. Um, I'm excited with the speed and the enhanced or increased levels of engagement and collaboration that can be spun out of it.
Yeah.
And now we're, as leaders in the supply chain, I think it's, how do we, I'm just thinking about it, how do we, how do we orchestrate that?
Hmm.
How do you conduct that so that you can get the most out of your people, get the most out of the insights that are produced, and how do you start applying those solutions to the opportunities, right? All in the spirit of growing the business.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that it leads to the technology breaks down some of these barriers. We're able to ask questions we haven't even considered because we just dismissed, like our folks could never figure that out. Now the data exists, and the engine can exist to start extracting some of that information. It's a super exciting time, which I guess leads to maybe the final question, or the final line is so as you look at this, I grew up, and I was in operations, and then I had procurement, and I had other accountabilities until I owned the sort of farm to fork part of the supply chain. But to be honest, while I had an ERP system, I didn't have great analytics. Everything was done in a spreadsheet. Your spreadsheet would be different than my spreadsheet. And now um, we're employing, so I didn't bring this innate understanding of, you mean there's a machine that I can't see and I don't know, and I can't figure out exactly how it determines, but it's telling me I ought to do this. um, you have to really lean into that if you didn't grow up with. You have to educate yourself. I know that you were just at plug and play, right? Kind of continuing to stay fresh and understanding, and yet we're employing all of these new employees that will bring these expectations and insights to us. Will bring this capability to us. How do you think about navigating that? What does the new employee look like, and what hope and angst do you have as you think about growing them into your former job, my former job?
Yeah, I think I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, just trying to understand how and where we leverage AI across our business process, how it's going to shape the workforce, the traditional or conventional supply chain workforce, and then how and where those two intersect, and what does it mean um, for the supply chain of the future, and the people that are associated with it. It's an interesting question, and I don't know if we have the answers yet. But as I sit and reflect on it, yeah, you need to be technical and digitally savvy, right? You need to understand um, to a to a decent degree, right, the construct of the data sets that you're querying, right? So,
Hmm.
I think, and as me just wanting to make sure that there's, some of the information that's being presented is credible, right? Really making sure that those interacting with AI and the digital environments understand the sources, right? Are these
Right.
sources that are credible? Are these sources that um, are pieces that are truly referenceable in shaping the outcomes, or at least the presented or proposed solutions. And then, as I reflect on the workforce, right, most of the next generation that are entering the supply chain, or that are, within their first 3 years in it, they are digitally sound. They're very comfortable in devices, and I think are more and more comfortable with content, either creating it, navigating through it, otherwise. But I think reflecting on, I don't know if I did answer your question, but as I sit and reflect on it,
Mm-hmm.
is this transformation of the supply chain analyst or um, the staff agent that supports the group, as I've learned the trade and as you've learned the trade, is this black box that we ask questions and provides us in response answers and insights, is this going to shape and create a void for supply chain development? That is a concern. Um, Traditionally, I've learned supply chain through the successes and failures of those um, progressive roles, and many of those progressive roles are going to be replaced
For sure.
by the tools that are very clearly adding value or providing more and more confidence that they will create the value we expect them to, and replace those. So yeah, it's going to, as supply chain leaders, I think we're going to need to assemble our bench of talent
Right.
with a much different approach, acknowledging what AI potentially could do and what roles, critical functions and roles it will replace, and then how do we get those experiences into the next future leader, and how do we get them exposed to those experiences, and how do we get them exposed to, right, not just the wins. You learn as much from you learn as much as of course learn as much about failure and the requirement
Yeah.
to course correct and to self-reflect and to um, root cause, that I think digital agents are going to replace a lot of that.
That's an interesting point. You're right. We learned by getting thrown into the deep end of the pool and kind of figuring it out. And sometimes it didn't go perfect, but it taught us to swim better the next time. And if AI is taking those things and solving the problems before they become problems, which by the way is the promise and the idea, how do we get a feel? How does our BS detector go off if the answers have always been provided to us with those things solved out? There's going to have to be some real interrogation of the solutions and why is this the answer, to your point around where the data come from, why do we think that, so that we're not building our strategies around hallucinations. At the same time, I think that the you and I's of the world are going to have to think about, maybe our development was what it was because it had to be, and the development of the people in the future is going to be what it is because it has to be or gets to be. And somewhere in the middle, we're all better. I do know that we're seeing time and time again that the leverage of these tools is going to make us better. It's going to make us smarter, and can it allow us to prevent some mistakes? Now, to your point, but those mistakes make us better, and as leaders, as practitioners. How do we think through that, and how do we develop that? That's a really interesting point that probably deserves another podcast. Well, Tim, it was great to talk with you. Thank you for your time today. Folks, if you like what we had to say or you have some comments, please, first of all, click subscribe. We'd love to have you be part of our family and the solution. And if you have comments, we read our comments, we react to them, and so please start a dialogue with us. Tim, thank you. I hope you have a great day, and thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks, Scott.